Welcome to day 50 of your 100 days of Python challenge. Today's project is the Weather Dashboard app, a visually appealing and interactive application that fetches real time weather data using an API and displays it in a clean, user friendly interface. You'll work with APIs, data parsing, and web frameworks to create this application. Let's look at what you learned today. First, we'll be learning using a weather API to fetch data. Next, processing and displaying this weather information, creating a clean web interface with Flask, enhancing the dashboard with interactive features, which overall kind of will make up our day 50 project, which is the weather dashboard app. So let's go ahead, and I have already created a folder day 50 on my desktop inside Python folder, and I'm going to first talk about using a weather API to fetch data. Now we will be using a popular choice, which is the Open Weather API, which we already probably have signed up for and get their free API key. This is how the website looks like. So if you look at, if you go to the API, that's where you'll see this information. But if you go to openweathermap.org and go here on the top and sign in, I am already signed in, and go to my API keys, you can create an API key by just giving some name to the key and generate, and it will generate API key for you. You can activate and deactivate. What I do is for every single project, I create a new key and then I deactivate it and delete it. So let's go ahead and use this API key for our project. Also, we would need to make sure that we have all the required libraries. So inside here, inside your command prompt or terminal, just go ahead and try this out. Pip install request, which is used to make a request to URLs, and Flask, which will be used, the framework that we'll be using for creating web pages. So go ahead, and it should say requirement already satisfied, or if you don't have it, it will download these libraries for you. Now let's go clear this out, and in here, day 50, I'm going to create a new file. I'll call this day 50. I'm just going to play around with different elements here. So day50.py. So first, we're going to go ahead and import request. Next, I need my API key. So I'm going to say API key equal to, I'll go to my browser, copy this, come back here and paste it. Use your own API key. This will not work for you. Next, I need the base URL. Now the base URL is the URL where the API exists. So if you go here to, let's say, API, and inside this, we have this current weather API documentation. Inside this, you'll find the URL which you'll be using, which is this URL. So this is the base URL, and it needs different types of parameters, and depending on what you're doing, you'll be giving different set of parameters, and you can read all about it right here. So I'm going to go back here and I'll say the API that I'm using is https://api.openweathermap.org/data/2.5/weather. So that's my base URL for the API. So let's go ahead and fetch the weather for a particular city. So I'm going to write a function for that, call it fetch underscore weather, and inside this I'll give a city to it, colon, and next I'm going to give the parameters that I need. Now if you looked at different parameters that are available over here in the website, these are the different parameters that you can provide for fetching weather for different things. Now the one that I am interested is based on the city name. So if you look to the right here, you'll see built-in API request by city name, and that's what I want to use. And if you see, it needs Q, which is the city name, app ID, which is the API key, and then I'll also use units, which I'll be using metric. There's standard and imperial. These are different options available. So I'm going to use metric for that. So those are the parameters that I'm kind of providing here in JSON format. I'm going to say Q or a dictionary format, city, which is passed from the user when they call this function or whoever calls this function. Next, I need app ID. As you see here, it is where we're ready to go. Go back here and see app ID. So that should be exactly like that, app ID, which is nothing but my API key that I have. Next, I need units, and that I will select as metric. So you can also use imperial if you want to see Fahrenheit here. So that's what I'll use. Next, I'm going to go and say response equal to request. So I'm going to use that library that I have dot get, and to this I'll pass the base URL and I'll pass the parameters equal to params. So I'm saying that this is the base URL and these are the parameters. What this will do is, when you pass this something like this, what it does is it will create a format something similar to this. Let me just add it here. HTTP API weather queue city name app ID equal to app ID, and then it will create one more, since we also said units, so it's going to say units equal to, in our case it'll say metric, so it will say metric here, something like this. Will be the URL that will be called. So that brings us to next one, to check if response actually comes back. I'm going to do check status. So every time you make a request, you get request, it will give you a status code based on what came back from the server. So if it's 200, which means it gave you a good response. So your request was good and it gave you a good response. I'll take that response and convert that, and inside that there's JSON. So I'm going to say response.json. That's what I'll get. Else, which means if there's not 200, that means something went wrong. So I'm going to just say return none in this particular case. So either I'll get some good data or I'll get nothing. So that's what this particular function does. Now to use this, let's go ahead and create an example. I'm going to say city equal to London, and then I'll say weather underscore data equal to fetch weather, and then I'll pass this city, which is London. So I'm calling this function right here, and then if weather, so if I get the weather data, which means it's not none, if there was some response come back, I'm going to say print weather data, save it, go back to my command prompt, and I'll say python day50.py, and if you see, it will give me the weather for London. If you look at the temperature, it's 5.56 degrees Celsius right now, feels like 3.79 degrees Celsius. It has all different types of information. Also, if you want to look at in your browser, you can just copy this, go to your browser, open a new tab, I'll paste it here, and in here city name I'll just say London, and API key is missing, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that and put the API key right here and press enter, and there you go, we have our information. So if you see here, it will give you coordinates, London, longitude and latitude for London. It will say weather is, this is the ID, main cloud, there's clouds, overcast clouds, description is there, base stations, main, it has temperature, feels like. So all this information is available that comes from that API. So next step here is processing and displaying weather information. So what we'll be doing right now is, so we have this JSON information that we get. If you see here, we all got all that JSON information or something that looks like this. I want to parse some particular things, like I want to get the city name. If you see, the city name is available right here, name equal to London. I want to get the temperature from, let's say, where is that, inside main temperature, I have temperature. I want to get a description which is under weather, and I have description right here. It's a list of items, so I'm going to get the first item in the list and get the description. I want to get humidity, which is right here. I want to get the wind speed, which is inside wind speed, and this is in miles per second, so that's available to me. So I want to use that information in here. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function right here, call this parse underscore weather, and then pass the data that I get, which is just weather data that I get, and I'll say city equal to data. So whatever that data is, so for example, whatever this data is, inside this there's an attribute called as name, so I'm going to use that. That will be my city name. Next, I'm going to get temperature, which comes from data again, and inside that, let's see what is the temperature. It's inside main, and inside that there is another element, and that is temp. That's where the temperature is. Next, I want to get description of how the weather is right now. That comes from data, and inside that I have this weather block, And in this particular case, it's not an object inside, it's a list of items. Like if you see a square bracket, so I'm going to say get me the first element, which is 0, and then inside that I have description, and that's what I need. So that's what I'm going to display. Next, I'm going to say humidity. Now for humidity, I'll say data, and where is humidity? Right around here, which is inside main and humidity. So I'm going to say main, and I can type the spelling, but why not copy paste it? Just so that if they mess it up, you also mess it up. It has to be consistent. Data, now wind speed, again wind, and inside that there's a parameter speed. If you want to cross check, you can check here wind, and then speed is right inside there. And then this is what I will return back to whoever calls this function with the data. I'll say city is city. I'll say temperature is temperature. I'll say next one was description is description. Next I'll say humidity is humidity. And finally I have wind speed. Wind speed is wind speed. So I have 1 2 3 4 5, 1 2 3 4 5. So all that I'm passing back to whoever called it. Now let's go ahead and call that right here. So if the weather data exists, instead of displaying this, I'm going to say parsed underscore data equal to parse data, that call that parse weather, sorry, not parse data, parse weather. And to that I'll pass the weather data here, and I can go ahead and print my parsed data. So save it, go here, run it, and you'll see it's properly parsed into the elements that you need. I don't want everything, I just want these elements, and that's what I can do by parsing that data from what I received. So that brings us to creating a clean web interface with Flask. So we have created, or we have gone through Flask quite a lot in detail, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder here, and I'm going to call it weather app, and inside that I'll add all my code. So I'm going to keep this handy because I'll probably be using some of it, and inside here I'll create a new file, and as the standards I'm going to call it app.py. That's my root file. Also I'll create my HTML from, so I'll create a new folder here first, new folder, call it templates, and then inside that, so instead of creating it here, I'm going to say inside this template I want to create a new HTML file, index.html, that will be served when a particular function is called here, which is depending on the route. So to start with Flask, I'm going to say from Flask import, I need the Flask function to create a Flask app. I need render underscore template to render the HTML, and I need request to make the URL queries. Now next I'm going to say import request to, so this request is part of Flask, but this is the actual request that we'll be using. So next, to create the app, I can say app equal to Flask, and the default name in Python is underscore underscore name, which takes the name of the application. Now I need API key and base URL, which I already have it here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy it from here, paste it here, save this file. So I have this basic stuff ready. Next, let's go ahead and also add the fetch weather function here, because we'll be fetching weather here next. So I'm putting the fetch weather function here. Next, I'm going to parse weather. So I'm going to take this and add that here. So I have my parse weather and fetch data available right here. Now I can directly do this here. Sometimes it's much easier to write it directly. So some people prefer it the above way, some people prefer it just to put it in line. So these are the two different methods. I just wanted to let you know. So this is another way of directly accessing the data and displaying it instead of creating variables. So these are two different things that you can do. Next thing, let's create a route where we can open the web server and run it. So I'm going to move it all the way to the top here so you can see clearly. And here I'm going to say app.route. The route that I want to catch is, now again, if you don't understand anything that I'm doing here, you probably would want to go back to the Flask tutorials that we have completed. Methods that I'm gonna take care of here is get and post. So you can also post if you want, but the function that it will run is home whenever this route slash is called, which is the main route. Now here I'm going to say weather equal to none. Initially I'll create a weather parameter with none. Now I'm going to check if request dot method, so this is a Flask request, which is this one. So if a request was made which is of the method and it is post, so it was posted to us, I'm going to say city equal to, so from that request I'm going to try to get the name of the city. So I'm going to say request dot form dot get city, because we'll be creating a form for that, where user will enter a city name and you will post that, and then this will process it. So I get the city name here. Next I need to get the data so I can pass it back. So I'm going to say fetch weather, and based on the city that was provided by this route, I will fetch the weather from this particular fetch weather function. Now next I'm going to check if data exists. Then what do? Then I need to pass the weather. So I'm going to say weather equal to parse weather, that's the function that we have, and inside this I'll pass the city that we, oh sorry, not city, we'll pass the data, because it takes the data here and it will give me this just filtered data set with only these elements that I need. Next I'm going to go ahead and return render underscore template, and the thing that I want to render is index.html, and I'll say weather equal to weather. So this is what I return. So what I'm doing is whatever weather I have, I'm going to pass it into a variable called as weather and pass it to index.html. Index.html will have templates which will display this data that I have, which is city, temperature, description, humidity, wind speed, that will be displayed inside the HTML elements. This function home here just does is fetches the data from the form and renders this template out. So next, let's go ahead and say if underscore underscore name equal to underscore underscore equal to underscore underscore main underscore underscore, then I'm gonna say app dot run in debug mode, debug equal to true. So this takes care of our app.py file, where it will accordingly render our home page. So that's good. Now let's go ahead and create our index.html template. Now if you remember, it always starts with doc type HTML, and we have some HTML where we usually try to give first the head, where we try to give the title. So I'll create a title and I'll call it weather dashboard. Close this title, that's good. Next I'm going to close this head and then start with body. So inside body I will go ahead and inside this body I will create some div. So this is a layer class equal to container. So that's how I start my body with so this will be something that will style in a little while, but for now this is what it will look like. It will have weather here, and oh sorry, I call it weather dashboard slash close my header. Next let's create the form that I was talking about. So form, oops, slash close the form. So usually I open and close immediately, and inside here method equal to post, because I want to post this data to the same URL. So it will call the same URL with post and it will display this information here. So input, so what did we say? We said that we are going to get the data from city field. So there's an input here, type equal to text, so user can enter text here. Name of this field is city, and I'll put a placeholder there so it shows like some information to user. It says enter the city name, and I'll say this is required, so it has some basic validation available. Next I'm going to say button type equal to submit. What this does is submit buttons actually submit the form to the same URL. That's what it does if you don't provide a URL. If you provide a URL here, it will submit to that particular URL. I'll say get weather and close this button tag. So that button will have text get weather. So form is closed. Now this will display. So if I just open this in browser, you see this, it shows a ugly little form here, but I can style it in a little while. But that's my form. Now if the weather information is available, I can always add these special characters which check our where you can write Python code, where I can check if weather. So if weather data is available, do this is what I'm saying here. So also I'll close it here. Close is end if. So this is the start of if, this is the close of end if. So this is that Jinja 2 that we have learned earlier. That's the language. So if the weather data is available, which means I have submitted data and I fetched some data back, then I'll say div and I'll give a class equal to, this is because I'll be adding some styles to this, weather card. I'll close this div. Okay, and inside this I'll create a header, but I'll create a smaller header h2, and this I'll say weather dot city. So where is this getting detail from? So if you remember here, we passed the weather and this weather has city, so this will display the weather city right here. Next I'll create a paragraph and I'll make this capitalized by saying strong, and I'll say temperature because this is one of the main important things that we need. So I'll say strong, close that, and then here from my weather object that I have, inside that it has temperature. That's what I'll display here. I'll make sure I'll close this temperature, this thing out here. Also I can make sure that this is says degrees Celsius because I'm getting the data in Celsius. This is coming from again this temperature data that we have. Now similarly, I can add the other items like description, humidity, and wind speed, where I'm saying weather dot description, weather dot humidity, weather dot wind speed. So that's what I get from these in these different keys here. So once the data is displayed here, that's good. I think this takes care of our HTML here. Now if I open this here, if you look at open in browser, oh, so I open this in browser. It looks something like this here. If you see, it's a little ugly web page. So the best thing is to add some styles. Also, if you see here, it will show me all this information like this because I am not calling it from the actual app. I'm just directly opening it inside the browser. If you see the URL, is not a server URL. So let's go ahead and give some styles. Now, if we've done some styles, but before what we did was we kind of created a style link or created a different file, but in here we're going to do in the same page we'll add styles. So for body I'll add some styles like I'll say font dash family is Arial and sans serif. That's my first one. I'll say margin is 0. I'll give padding of 0 pixel. I'll give text text align. So where do I want to text align? I'll say center. Next I'll say background color. I want to give a background color. My favorite color is F0 for this particular project, F8 and FF. So that's what I'll give. If I save this, go back to my browser here, if you see now it's all centered, it has a nicer color, the font is applied, so that looks good. Now for the container, which is our main class here, I can just say dot, since it's a class I have to use dot container, and to that I'll give a style. I'll say padding equal to 20 pixel, something like that, and it will look, I'll give a little bit padding from the top. So it gives padding on all the sides, but we clearly saw that it gave some padding. Next for the weather card, which is this div here, I'm gonna say I'll give a bunch of styles like let's say margin is 20 pixel auto. Next I'll say padding equal to 20 pixel, that's also a set. Next I will say max width for this I'll set as 400 pixel. So depending on which device you're opening, max width should be that. Border equal to, I'll say 1 pixel solid. So it's, I'm saying 1 pixel is solid and it's of the color DDD. Next I'm gonna say border radius. I can also say border radius. I'll show you that is radius. If you've not used it before, 10 pixels. Let's save this and go back here. So if you see this nice radius around it, if I give like 50 pixel, you'll see much more curved. So but I'm like the 10 pixels, so I'll keep that as the border radius. I'll give a background color so it stands out, because right now it doesn't. Give it border of white, background of white, and there you go, it looks much cleaner right now. Next, I'm gonna give a box shadow, so it looks has like more of a 3D effect. 0, 4 pixel, 8 pixel of how big the shadow should be. That's what I'm specifying here by saying these values here. Next, the color of that RGBA, I'll say 0, comma 0, comma 0, comma 0.1. So that gives us a little bit nicer box shadow, if you see that transparency and stuff that I've assigned, and that's why it looks like this. So this looks pretty cool right now, but let's run it from the server and see how it looks like. So I'm gonna close this. So this kind of brings us, so we kind of did the enhancing the dashboard with interactive features, as you can see here. Next, is our day 50 project weather dashboard app, which we created. So this is the entire app, where our goal was to build an interactive weather dashboard app with a user-friendly web interface, real-time weather data fetching and display, and clear and concise formatting for key weather metrics. That's what we did, but we have not yet run the app. So let's go ahead and run the app. I'm going to go here and see which folder I'm in. So I'm going to go into weather app first, clear this out. Let's see, we have the app.py file. I'll say python app.py. This will run our server, and then I can take this, go here and open it. Now look at the difference between the two. That's what I'm talking about. In here, I'm going to say, let's say Atlanta, get weather. It's going to call the API and it will display it. Look at the difference. As I mentioned, this one, since I directly opened it, it looks like this, but since this I'm accessing from the URL, it's, of course, it's a little bigger like this, 150%, but this is a much cleaner, much better with all the information over here. Washington DC, get weather, there you go. Let's go to London, get weather, perfect. So we have our nice app displayed here. Now, just to go over it, we kind of added API integration. We fetched real-time weather data using Open Weather API. We did create a dynamic web interface. We used Flask and HTML templates to display data. We created interactive features where we allow users to input the city name right here and view the corresponding weather data right here. Bonus challenge for today is, if you want to add error handling for invalid city names or API failures, for example, like this is a failure here, and that's why it didn't work. If you look here, probably it didn't work because I entered something random and it didn't like it. Next, display weather icons alongside description using Open Weather API icon API. So there's an icon that is available. If you see here, that's what you can use. Save the recent searches and allow users to revisit them. You can kind of create a history tab somewhere and then display all these different ones below, maybe above, wherever you feel comfortable. And deploy the app to Heroku. We have already learned that. Or if you want to do it to AWS, you can do that for public access and share it with everybody else. So I hope that was helpful and you were able to follow along. If you have any questions on whatever we did or have any doubts, let me know in the messages and I'll get back to you.